Hello there, Terry here with another episode of the Animation Industry Podcast. Today I have a pretty interesting episode about the not so talked about side of animation, which is everything to do with sound design. But when you think about it, pretty much half of an audience's experience with animation is just sound, everything from voice acting, music, and sound effects. So today I am talking with an animation sound designer who has a really insightful look into the right way to put together sound for your animation, whether it be a portfolio, a demo reel, or any kind of short film or feature film even. And his name is Barret Slagl, and he started his journey into animation way back when he actually signed with Atlantic Records as a recording artist. So with Atlantic Records, he did extensive touring. He shared a stage and co-wrote songs with Alain Whyte, who worked with Morrissey. He cut a record with legendary producer-engineer Joe Chiccarelli, who worked with U2, Beck, and the White Stripes, and mixer Brian Malouf, who worked with Michael Jackson and Queen, and he did all of this before the age of 23, which is quite insane. And after gaining all of this experience and learning from these masters, he realized he had a passion for working in the studio, and so he decided to pursue a full-time career as a producer. And since then, he has produced, recorded, mixed, and co-written dozens of albums at artisan labels, and now he co-owns his own animation studio called Open the Portal, where he also heads up the audio department and does all the sound effects and music for their animations. And some of his work has included projects for Katy Perry, A$AP Rocky, Mattel, and Disney. So, Barret, I am really excited to chat about everything to do with sound design. How are you doing today?
I'm doing wonderful. Thanks for having me on the podcast.
Yeah, so I know I kind of chatted a little bit about what propelled you into this career, but you've worked on so many cool projects. What has given you the passion to work on animations and sound design and all that stuff in the first place?
Well, I just generally have a passion for music and audio in general. I think I've had that since I was a kid, and there's something about sound design very specifically where it allows me the opportunity to really explore and craft and create insane sounds that you wouldn't even have a need for in just music. And I like to play, I like to twist and mingle and find the right thing, and that's something I'm very passionate about.
Do you ever feel that animation is enhanced by the sound effects and music and stuff like that?
Absolutely. I'm under the impression that music and sound is half of the animation because, if you're doing live action, you might have people on set that are, recording things here and there, but animation is just photographs. So you need to put sound in to help connect your audience to the images that they're seeing.
Yeah, for sure. So I want to talk a lot about how, as an animator, I can use sound to, enhance my work or my portfolio or what I'm working on. But first, I want to know, how did you learn to sound design and all this stuff too? Because you've worked on a lot of great projects, but you had to start somewhere. So did you go to school for this, or how did you learn the animation audio industry, I guess?
Yeah. So I was working at a studio producing albums, so I was pretty proficient at running the software, knowing all the ins and outs of audio flow, and really how to craft songs and stuff. And it wasn't until David, who was the singer of my old band, went to Cal Arts, and he would just send me all of his projects, and he would tell all of his friends at school, oh, I have an audio guy, and he would send me over the animation, and I didn't know how to deal with audio and video together, but that was kind of my school. We always kind of joked that David and I kind of went to school at the same time, and I was very self-taught. I use the internet as a resource and YouTube videos, and even today I have a list of audio sound design Facebook groups that I'm referencing every day, where we're just talking about all the latest tech, and it helps me kind of stay up to date.
So so you didn't go to school for this. Can you go to school for this? Can you take courses and whatnot for sound design? Is it in general, or is it can you take specific animation ones, or?
to my knowledge, I don't think there is a specific animation sound course. But I do know there are plenty of audio degrees and engineering and composition that would include sound design in that.
Gotcha. So at this point, like, you're doing commercial work, you co-own a studio. Say I have a project that I need sound for, like music, sound effects, and whatnot. What do I come to you specifically for? Like, what are your skills in relation to what I might need?
So my main two focuses is sound design and composition. So if you are in need of some music, you could talk to me and I would sit down with you, watch the animation, and really kind of discuss what my thoughts are, what your thoughts are, and I would like write and score the film. I also handle sound design, so and that could also include sound effects or manipulating and creating sounds from the ground up.
Yeah.
And even a little bit of Foley mixed in there somewhere, which is me actually performing weird sounds in my studio with a microphone, which has a fun, rich history that dates all the way back to the radio dramas.
So, like, what's a weird sound you've done? Can you do some weird sounds right now? This is a podcast. I know one where you can put your hand over your mouth and make a farting noise.
Well, one thing I realized when doing animation is I'm finding myself always in need of weird, kind of gloopy, sloppy, slimy sort of sounds because when you're working with claymation, things can tend to kind of move, and it's probably also sort of open the portal style to do stuff that's a little kind of a little rough. And so some great resources for that is like fish.
Oh no.
You get a slab of fish and kind of like squish and grime that. Also, if you want a good bone breaking sound, a good usage for that is actually frozen vegetables like frozen celery. And then you'll get a great little crack, like, and it'll be the gnarliest bone cracking sound you can find.
So does your office smell disgusting?
I have different places where I can record different things.
Yeah, outside. So like whenever I'm doing sound design, I think, or maybe I'm using that term incorrectly, but we can talk about that later. For my animations, like I do a lot of characters walking, and I find that footsteps are kind of, for me, the hardest sound to create. Like if I do it too hard on the table, it sounds off, or like if I look up effects, it's like, I don't know, it's too muddy or it's too loud or something. Like, what is a good footstep?
That right there, I guarantee if you talk to anybody that does any kind of Foley, that's the part that is probably one of the most difficult things to really capture because there are an infinite amount of factors, what kind of shoes, what kind of surface, what kind of walking pace, are they running, are they jumping, are they sliding? That can get very, very tedious very quick. And that's only if you're performing it live. And generally you need what's called a Foley stage, which is like a very big room where you can like have the space and equipment to be able to project and record and do all that live. I found myself when I'm unable to do that, when I don't have the time also, I do have a library with footsteps in it that I've been collecting over the years. And usually what you'll have is like one audio track that has, all those sort of parameters. So you'll have like, high heels on concrete, right? And then it'll be a long audio file that'll be walking slowly and then a little bit faster and then they're running. And then the most important thing for anyone that's trying to record and sample Foleys is you need some jumps and some sliding of the shoes. Help really, really put a little detail in. If someone's kind of walking, if you just add a little bit of like to the end, it really creates this feeling of them kind of stopping. Even if it's off screen, it's nice to, it's weird how it works. It just, your brain tells you that person just stopped.
Interesting. So I have a whole bunch of questions around this. Maybe I was going to ask them later, but since we're talking about it now, why don't we?
Sure.
So in terms of timing, like you just said, like if you add like like a slide and a stop, like at what point do you put in the footstep? Is it like right as like a character's foot hits the ground, like that frame, or do you do it slightly before or slightly after? Like what is your guide for, or is it just like you feel it as you watch it?
Sure. That's a very good question. Because our brain oftentimes won't. Sometimes if you put it right on the frame, it won't feel right. So what I usually do is start with right on the frame, like right when the foot hits the floor, and then I watch it and see how it is. And sometimes if you nudge it just like even milliseconds a little behind or a little before, you can kind of find the sweet spot.
Okay, so it's kind of like a feeling. Is there like a feeling you of like satisfaction maybe you get that you know it's done right?
Yes, absolutely. I would say a lot of things in this line of work, does kind of end up coming down to a little bit of that. It just feels right.
So maybe like what sets like when you're watching other animations or just anything, what sets like an amateur sound design production apart from one that's done professionally? Like if you're doing something and you're like, yes, I got this right, it feels satisfactory, but if you're watching something, how can you tell that this something is like off, I guess, or not done correctly?
Right. There are a few kind of common mistakes that I see a lot, especially with like student films. One of which is generally the dialogue is not recorded very well.
Yes.
And it just always breaks my heart when I see a beautiful animation and you can tell that the voice is recorded on a laptop. And I understand there's a lot of limitations when you're a student and you're on a deadline and you're trying to get your piece done. But if there's like any encouragement I can give students is like, say your due date is on the 10th, in your brain, set it to, the 5th at least, and or if not more time, and just create yourself a little buffer room to really dive in and do the sound properly.
Gotcha. With the sound effects itself, like like I do stop motion and I have like, I'm tempted to put like a sound effect for absolutely everything, like an eye blink, a footstep, I don't know, a hair swoosh, like whatever. How do you, and then when I watch it, like in my mind, I'm like, yeah, this is great because I'm looking at each specific thing, waiting for the sound effect. But then sometimes when somebody else watches it, they're like, whoa, this is just overwhelming with sounds.
Right.
How do you, how do you discipline yourself or know what's right to do? Because sometimes I'll watch an animation and only realize that like you don't even hear the footsteps. They didn't
Right.
even put that in, and it doesn't even need it. It's fine just as a silence or something.
Absolutely. So I would say that the big picture answer to your question is story is king, right?
Okay.
You should every decision that you make when you're making a film should always be reflective and supporting the story. That and so with sound specifically, whenever you put a sound effect on emotion or an action, it's going to draw the attention of the audience to that action, right? So if you're adding too many sounds, the you might be adding a sound effect to an unnecessary part that might take away or be distracting from the main focus of the scene. Not to say you can't put sounds on a lot of stuff, but there's a whole nother element we haven't even talked about, which is sort of levels and mixing. You know,
Yeah.
like maybe you have the hair swoop, but maybe you kind of cut out some low end, pull it way down where it's kind of just felt, and it can be in the background, but maybe not necessarily forefront.
Oh gosh.
So
So
that
like,
adds a whole nother layer to sound as well.
but it makes sense that if you're trying to follow the story, like maybe the story includes hearing all of the things going on, but
Sure.
focusing on something specific. Interesting.
Absolutely. But I will say that your brain can only focus on so much. So, you know, one technique that I use a lot is, you know, after I put all my sounds in, I tend to go through and just start muting stuff and going, does it need that? Does it need that? Do I need to get rid of that? And just kind of see what I can get away with. And sometimes it also changes the whole mood, right? Like if say you had a section where you hear all the Foley and the sound effects, and then the music sweeps in and you have this real beautiful dramatic moment. What if all the sound effects just go away and all you're hearing is music and this visual? That's going to be a completely different feeling. So I think it's really, everything is very dependent on the scene and the story. I don't think there's quite an easy answer to that question.
Gotcha. Yeah. So, well, I guess like you said, it's also like a very like almost emotional, I guess, skill set you need to have.
Absolutely. I mean, that's one thing that I'm constantly asking myself when I'm seeing a scene is, you know, what emotion it needs to be coming across here. Am I feeling that emotion? You know, that should absolutely be at the top of your forefront all the time as you're going through.
Gotcha. So maybe let's backtrack a little bit and talk more about like the career slash like business of sound. Like, first of all, like what excites you about being in this career?
Oh man, I mean, I just love it. I'm passionate about it. I mean, like that's why I was stoked to do this podcast. I will literally geek out for hours on all this stuff, and the fact that someone is willing to value my time and skill set enough to pay me money for it, that's very exciting to me. And also too, just, you know, Dave and I tend to work together on also creating the stories and our own original IP, and I love storytelling, and developing our own work is extremely exciting to me.
So, well, you just said something interesting, that somebody would pay you money to do what you want to do. And that's like, I think the biggest jump in any passion career is doing something for yourself and then getting paid to do it. So how did you, I know we kind of went through the history a little bit, but how did you make the jump from being like, I love sound, to actually getting paid and actually getting clients?
Right. Well, that started, to me, there was kind of two phases. There was, you know, my career as a music producer. So that was just me being 24 years old, and I had a little computer in my bedroom, and I was a part of sort of the music community, and I just, word of mouth got around that I had a skill set and people were willing to pay for it. And then fast forward to open the portal, we just kind of, we built a pretty strong presence. And what it really comes down to is you being confident in what your value is. You know, people are going to pay you money for something that you're confident that you can do. If you feel like you're worth $5, that's what people are going to pay.
Gotcha. So do you, I guess, when you're pitching, do you have a worth in your mind, or is it based on the budget they have or something? I don't know. Like, how does that work?
Well, as I definitely have like a sort of standard rate now. Things are a little bit more structured, where, you know, I have a rate that I use for a day rate, or maybe a project rate or something like that. And that has been continually used over the years, that works for us and myself.
Okay, fair enough. So like, like, I guess if you wanted to get into sound design, what are some of the things that people look for, like in your portfolio, or like want to see? Like, you just, I guess people heard of you from word of mouth, but if you were starting from scratch, like what would you put together?
So you're saying somebody that has no experience, how do they
Yeah.
begin developing a career path?
Yeah.
I would suggest just putting together a reel, you know. If you're a student and you're passionate about sound, you know, reach out to all the students that are making films, and you know, you need to do a lot of work, and prove that you can execute good work. And once you have that, then it would be more appropriate to and there's different career paths as well. You know, do you want to be freelance and work for yourself? There's also other opportunities where you can go intern at a big audio production studio, and so maybe you might be running for a while, and then, you know, maybe after a year or two they kind of throw you little projects, and then next thing you know, you're the head sound designer at, you know, Warner Brothers or something. So there's definitely different, to me, those are the kind of the two main paths of, you know, freelancing, creating your own thing, or working for a bigger studio.
Gotcha. Are there like specific things that you should include in a portfolio? Like I can do dramatic music, mooding, or like I can do sound effects. Like, are there things that I guess are looked for?
Mm-hmm. That is definitely a very good question. This is just my personal opinion. I would suggest really including stuff that is uniquely you.
Yeah.
Because you want to be the person where people go to, where that's the only place they can get that thing, you know? It's like, you know, like say you're sending a reel around and it just has this really unique thing and it gets passed across the desk, and like, oh, Terry does this really cool thing and I need that thing, so we're going to hit up Terry. Like, right? That should be the idea.
So like what's so you, for instance, I guess, can other people tell when you've worked on a project, like you have a distinct, I guess, style that you try to use in your work?
Yes. I wouldn't necessarily say it's something I do consciously. I just have a lot of different influences, even coming back from my days doing music production. You know, I think there are certain things I might even do a little bit unorthodox to the way some people might, that gives my stuff a little bit of an extra flavor.
So like what's an example of something unorthodox that you might do with sound?
Well, I would say the first thing that I think does end up influencing my piece, my work, is my workflow. Traditionally, when you're making a film, you would have, you know, one person doing the music, one person doing sound design, one person doing editing, one person doing Foley, and so on. And just to the sheer, limitation of it just being me, I find that I tend to sort of Jackson Pollock my audio, in a sense that I'm not always thinking about, all right, I'm working on music now, or I'm working on sound effects now. I'm just watching the piece, and then I might really quickly switch over and record a little piano part, and then switch over, and then, you know, kind of toss in some sound effects and kind of build it very holistically together. And I'm sure some people do the same thing, but that's just what works for me, and I have the luxury to be able to do that. And I think the end result is a much more cohesive and very intentional sound track.
So how do you know when something is finished? Like obviously there's like deadlines with commercial projects and whatnot, but like you said, you might just hop on the piano or you might record something. Like, how do you know you're done?
Yeah, and that goes a little bit to our previous conversation of that is something, once you develop a good ear and once you do it a lot, that there's something in your gut that just, and sometimes even it's an emotion. Like sometimes I watch something that I did and it feels like I didn't do it. It feels like I'm no longer working on something, I'm watching something that has nothing to do with me. You know, so, one of my favorite quotes is from Madeleine L'Engle, and she said, "The true, when the artist can when the artist can be a true servant of the work, that's when the work can transcend and become greater than the artist." And you know, there's just weird moments where you work on a work and it feels like you're watching someone else's work. And I don't know if that answers your question, but sometimes that is a feeling you can get when you know, okay, we're on to something. This is starting to get good. And then from then on out, it's just don't mess it up.
You know what? That's a really good quote. I really like that. And I often feel the same way when I'm animating. Sometimes when I'm working on a stop motion, it'll feel like, oh yeah, I did this and like this is the thing. But sometimes there's a point where it just feels like it exists and you're just watching it, I guess, versus like, oh, I remember doing this exact movement and whatnot. So I definitely get that. And I guess probably that's true for any art form.
Absolutely.
Um, so you mentioned training your ear, which I know we talked about before. Are there like specific, like say, okay, so from my perspective, and there are a lot of students listening to this as well who will have to put together student films and portfolios at some point, where like I don't have a lot of uh, experience with sound design and music and whatnot. What are some things that I can do to train my ear to when I put together my own stuff to know that, okay, this sounds very amateur, or like this, what can I do to train my ear to get to the next level and say, okay, this is actually what I should do instead, and this sounds much better.
Absolutely. So, in my opinion, the best thing to do is to listen to a lot of other people's work.
Yeah.
And by listen, I don't mean just listen. There's a it's a sort of like very intentional listening that you do have to. It's more training your brain, I think, than it is training your ears, right? Where you, as you're watching the piece, you're actually kind of dissecting a little bit the elements that are happening and listening to the Foley and how does the dialogue sound. And there's this weird thing where you can almost, even though the soundtrack is there, you begin to sort of separate out the elements and hear them individually and how they fit together.
Yeah.
And that's not something that I can give you an easy answer of here's what you need to do. I think it's just a little bit more of a mindset of just, you know, every time you're watching a movie, you know, or animation or whatever, just be cautious conscious rather of the different elements that are going on. And I think if you do that enough, without realizing it, you'll notice a change in yourself over time.
That makes sense to me because, for instance, like a story to get better at storyboarding, one technique is to watch TV and movies from a perspective of who's on what side of the screen, how do they cut, stuff like that, because
Yes.
it makes you more conscious of the decisions they're making. So the same thing. So maybe, you know, when do they come in with the music? When are they applying sound effects, stuff like that. So I think that's really good. And you mentioned, I know we've mentioned this a bunch and I'm kind of jumping all over the place. You mentioned sound design versus sound editing. And from what I thought before, they were just the same thing. But you told me there's a very clear distinction between them. Can you just explain the differences between the two?
Yeah, and to, I would say, to be fair, because of technology and low budget films, you know, so many films now are done like this, where it's just kind of one, maybe two people doing a lot of the work.
Yeah.
But very, in more traditional terms, a sound editor is someone who might search through a sound effects library and actually take those and sync them up to picture, right? So if you have a character like socking a guy in the nose and, you know, you go through your, you know, whatever software you're using, like SoundMiner, you know, and you type in your word, you find it, throw it in there, sync it up, it's in there. That would be more of a job of a sound editor. Uh,
Ah,
a sound designer is someone who would record and manipulate sounds through different like effects, whether it's like pitching or adding you know, some phaser or panning, or you know, or even just going out and searching and finding pitching and reversing a sound is like so wonderful, and it's such an easy thing to do to get a really interesting sound design sort of element. And
yeah.
so that would be the distinction of the two is one is a little bit more I won't say cut and dry, but I'll say it's very much just one to one, like here's the sound, I'm putting it in there. Whereas sound design, you know, you might even use synthesizers, right, to create and manipulate new sounds that don't really exist in the world.
Gotcha. So are there, like you mentioned, like reversing a sound effect? Are there other easy but effective techniques you usually use?
Yeah. So I'll try not to get too nerdy for people that don't.
Get as nerdy as you want.
Feel free to Google any of these terms if anyone really is interested in getting this nerdy. But I would say generally, there's really only a handful of sort of effects that we've opened up and combined, and there's always new things coming out. But very generally, like any software you're using will have some of these basic tools, which is reversing sounds is always a good, easy thing to just try it. Like put a sound in, reverse it, see what it sounds like. How does that feel to you? Could that be something interesting? Reverb is another good one that you can manipulate in a more sound design way. I think some people think of reverb as it just being sort of a light echo, like you sound in a room. But when you really start tweaking the knobs and you realize, oh my gosh, I can get this sustain that lasts for 12 seconds, from a clap. So you could clap and then hear this 12-second decay of, and then maybe you print that, reverse that, and now all of a sudden you have this nice little white noise swell that could, add a little stinger or something. And then delays are always great. Again, it's all about tweaking with the knobs and pushing them to the limits in which they're not properly supposed to be used. I will always encourage that, of just exploring and finding weird, fun things. And then there's stuff like phasers, and then just a couple little those simple things. Just literally, go in your software and go to the plugins and effects and just start plugging around and just experiment, and you'll kind of get a sense for how they're affecting the audio.
Is there like when you're listening to audio, is there something that immediately impresses you that when you hear it, you're like, nice job?
That's kind of hard to say. Yeah, I'm this is gonna sound weird, but I'm always impressed when people when people are more restrained, right? And when those moments when there should be something there, or the real obvious thing to do would be this, and they either don't have a sound there or they have an interesting sound. I mean, that I would pinpoint it that way. It's when you build up an expectation and break it in an unexpected way that's pleasing. I will always enjoy that, which is basically if you break down a joke, that's what a joke is, right? Is you set up an expectation, you break it unexpectedly in a pleasing way. And that always catches my ear when people do that in audio, sort of.
I never thought of audio as that before, but that totally makes sense. Like, say, I don't know if you can think of an example. I'm trying to think of one, like maybe in an animation where you have this like really buff character and you have him like not speak the whole time and he's like grunting whatever, and then when he does speak, it's like a little girl voice or something.
That's perfect. That's perfect. That's exactly. Anything like that is really interesting. And then, but again, like those are things that enhance the story,
Yeah.
And also too, I mean, think about it like animation. You know how in animation people kind of get stuck in these sort of like obvious sort of things to execute and do in animation, and it's always kind of refreshing to see an animation where they sort of take it in a little different direction. And audio is exactly the same way. And honestly, most of my opinions on audio are going to apply to every art form. I'm this crazy kind of holistic art thinking kind of guy where I think all arts are completely correlated, and you can learn something about, playing the piano, and you can learn lessons about cooking.
Yeah. Have you ever animated on that note yourself?
So I do not have the patience to really animate. I have mad respect for single one of you animators out there that has the patience to microscopically move something, and then, you know, when you accidentally bump the table, start over.
Oh my
You know,
gosh, that happened to me yesterday, actually.
I would definitely recommend to all the students to hot glue everything. Hot glue the camera to the floor, hot glue the table. Just, you can never use enough hot glue because you don't want to start your animation all over.
And you're not even an animator, so
Well, it's funny,
you
as
see it
like,
all the time, I guess.
yeah, well, you know, owning an animation studio, and the part of the vision for Open the Portal was to have a place where sound and animation coexist together beautifully. And so what I made it my mission the past 5 years to really understand the process of stop motion to a certain extent, you know, where to answer your question earlier, I did direct a short animation project. It was just for one of our Instagrams, and I had worked with an intern, and I had a vision, and I knew enough about animation to have a gist for like how it would work, and we planned it out, and she ended up being a killer animator and just blew it out of the water. And so I haven't done actual animation, but I actually really enjoyed kind of directing.
Nice. So, from the animation perspective, like you said, you don't have the patience to meticulously move something and spend hours and hours in doing it, but you do have the patience to spend all that time on audio. So, how long does it take you to actually do a project? Say, I don't know, I have a 1 minute animation. How long is that going to take you?
So I heard one lesson I learned a long time ago was to really optimize what you're doing. So I'm at a fairly optimized place right now where I know I all the hotkeys and shortcuts. Like, if you can save, you know, 3 seconds 1,000 times over, you know, you're gonna save up a lot of bank of time. So I feel like that's another skill set that I have, is to be able to know where to work efficiently and also leave room for creativity. So to answer your question, it really depends on the complexity of the piece, but generally speaking, as a rough guideline, I can do sound editing and sound design for a 1 minute piece in about a day. And assuming that the score isn't anything too spectacular, I can bust that out in also another day.
Nice. Well, that's, I mean, when I do audio for my like 7 second stop motion films, it takes me a day already. So I
Right.
can't imagine doing a minute.
But I bet you could animate a hell of a lot quicker than I can.
Well,
Or
can you actually talk about a project you're working on right now as an example, just to take us through the process of like, at what point do you come in and start doing sound design? Like for instance, do you wait until something is completely animated, or do you come in the process in the middle? I don't know. Do you have a project you're working on right now where you can just kind of explain from not having any sound to the finished product? What is the process you go through?
Right. So, do you want the ideal situation, or do you want what happens, say, on a commercial job?
Use like a specific scenario that's because like ideal is when does anything ever happen ideally, right? Like what is the nitty-gritty of how it actually works?
Sure. So, I feel like I can answer both. It Typically speaking, when I'm working on a commercial project, they usually don't bring me in until audio is always the afterthought, right? Like, say you're doing a commercial for Coca-Cola, and you know you have the ad agencies, and you know they're going to be working with the brand, and they're going to spend all this time coming up with the campaign. They're going to like figure out how to execute. They're going to hire all the people. There's going to be super stressing to like get it all done. And then at the very end, it's like, oh yeah, wait, and we need to like a little time for audio. That's not always the case, but it's been the case a lot of times. So generally speaking, I jump in usually very near the end of a project, hopefully during picture lock, because I've definitely more than once, you know, finished something and then there's edits and then I have to go in, and I actually have a whole system I've developed for very quickly adjusting stuff for picture lock.
What is picture lock?
Oh, so picture lock means that you're not going to edit the video anymore. So that means like that means like picture is locked. It's not changing. So I've been in situations where I do all this work on and I build the whole thing out. They're like, oh, we just cut 7 seconds off. That's fine. Like, can you just adjust it? And what people don't realize is with music, you're on a meter, like 1, 2, 3, 4. So to cut 7 seconds off, I might be in the middle of a bar and it just makes the whole song sound awkward depending on. So, and again, it's another skill set I had to develop was how can I very quickly adjust this music to where it still fits, but it can fit into their proper time, you know. Another very common commercial format they'll want is, you know, you do a commercial that's 15-second spot. It's the same spot, but they'll want a 15-second version, a 30-second version, and a 60-second version. So again, with music, I have to create a score that's gonna fit and sound great in a 15-second, a 30-second version, and a 60-second version. So that can also be a little bit challenging, and you know, you just kind of work through these things.
Gotcha. So like that makes sense to me because as like in my animation, sometimes I will cut out part of a scene or whatnot because it doesn't flow as well. So at what point should from my perspective, I do sound completely at the end because I don't know at all what it's going to be like. So what is, like you said, maybe let's talk about the ideal. What is the ideal point you actually want to come in and start working on sound or having an idea of what things will be like?
Well, assuming I'm doing the music and sound effects and most of the audio, I like to be involved. And this is how Open the Portal is structured, right? Is Dave and I decided, like, what's our ideal situation? That's why, you know, I have my studio in the same building as the animation, and we're on the same server and we can swap files all the time. My ideal situation is to be there from day one, right? Even we're just concepting the idea and doing pre-production, that still gives me ample time to start writing songs on the piano and just getting some ideas and kind of really honing you know, just really exploring ideas. So that way, by the time we get a little bit further along, I already have a direction. You know, maybe we change directions and I have ample time to try other ideas. And then, you know, I think a lot of the sound design stuff is a little bit better later, like once stuff is shot. But yeah, I just like being involved all the way through. And so we've even found sometimes music can inform and inspire the animation as well. Like sometimes I'll write a song that we know is going to be in a section, and then they'll animate to the song, right? Which is like amazing because that's when you get that real connecting point of the music and the animation just bouncing and working together. I mean, that was kind of how it was done back in the day. Like if you look at the old Mickey Mouse cartoons, they would record those jams, right? And then, yeah. I mean, people do it, not just the old cartoons, but
the merry melodies and all that stuff.
Right, and even like the background trees, right? We're like dancing to the beat, you know, it's great. I love all the old school like Fleischer stuff.
Yeah, it's pretty awesome. So going back to, I'm thinking about like student films and stuff. How do I actually find somebody like you to work on my project or my thesis film, or like say I'm even just putting together a short film for a festival, and I've watched a lot of short films, and some of the sound design can tell like, oh, they use that free sound effect that I've used in all of my things before. There's like a rooster crowing, there's like a whip sound, and like a lightning that I hear even in TV shows. And I'm like, I know where you got that. So
don't forget the infamous squawk of the hawk when
oh my gosh.
Whenever you're seeing like a shot of mountains, there's always it's always the same exact sample.
Yeah, it's so funny.
I won't go into this, but if all your viewers should, if you're interested in sound design effect memes that have been embedded into your childhood, that are jokes that they would just sort of like incorporate in movies to kind of talk to one another, look up something called the Wilhelm Scream.
Okay.
And you guys can have fun with that. You'll hear it and you'll think, I know that sound, and it's been with me since my childhood.
I know that it's in like movies all the way back to like Black and White, isn't it? Isn't it from it's from a soldier in one movie, isn't it?
It's actually from a cowboy getting eaten by a crocodile.
Oh yeah! Oh my gosh!
And
Yes.
I've actually heard there were like 3 or 4 takes of this scream, and you can hear he's like rah, rah, and then you get to the one and you're like, oh my god, that's a scream.
It's like that newspaper that's used in like every movie, right? Or like TV show as well. It's like just this giant inside joke.
Right.
Um,
Anyway, sorry, I didn't mean to get on more.
so how do I actually go about finding somebody to work with in sound design? Like you said, there are forums that you go on. Do I just like jump on one of those forums and be like, hey, yo, I have a student film I'm working on?
Yeah. Okay. So I'm gonna give you 3 different avenues. Like, say
Okay.
you're, let's assume you're a student, right? And you're making a short film. Avenue number 1 is, I'm sure your school probably has an audio department, but you know what I would do is I would go to the professor and say, who is your best student, right? And get their info, you know, or try and reach out to them or leave your card with the professor and connect one-to-one. And because so much of this industry is growing and building relationships with people, right?
Yeah.
So, you know, you may not want someone like me. If you're a student, I would encourage you to find someone like a peer that you guys can grow and work on stuff together, because once you find someone that you click with, you should stick with that person as long as possible. You know, there's a reason, you know, Tim Burton and Danny Elfman work together, and John Williams, and, you know, it's just, you build connections and grow with these people. So that's avenue number 1, I would suggest. Avenue number 2, like you said, I mean, Facebook groups are just huge right now. And there's like, I can't tell you how many, like, I even have a friend in casting. She does, you know, stuff for like reality shows, and she literally has a Facebook group where she's like, hey, I need a PA for whatever. And it's like, people get work through these things. So I would just go through Facebook and look for sound design groups and composer groups. And these are all people that have studios and are just would love to work. And who knows, maybe they're in the UK, like, but if you guys connect well, just work with that person. I mean,
Do you remember the names of any of these groups, or just?
I literally think one of them is called I Need an Audio Person. Like, you know what I mean? Like, it's just search on Facebook groups and just type in sound design, and you'll just go through the list and just start joining, you know?
Writing all these down.
Yeah, please do. So that would be a great reference. And then, you know, a third option would be like, just how you were saying, like, you know, look at student films that are kind of going around, and look at the name of the person, you know, that did the sound design, right? That's what credits are for, so you can track down that person. And who knows, maybe even if it's like I mean, sending an email definitely is never a bad idea as long as you're being respectful. But who knows, like, just hit up people and see who's down.
Hey, that's how we got to talking on this podcast, so it works.
Absolutely. I think some people get a little apprehensive about sending emails, and I, you know, again, keep it short and sweet, you know, and be honest. And, you know, worst thing that could happen is they don't say anything, and then that's fine.
Yeah. So say I want to do the sound design myself, and for instance, I've done the sound design for all my short stop motion films, but I have a lot of issues searching. Sorry, I don't do sound design. I do the sound effects. I'm not designing sounds.
Oh, sure, yeah.
I have a lot of, I don't have a studio where I can record things. I have done like, I don't know, like tapping and like whatever, whistling noises and stuff. But I have a really hard time searching for the right sound effect. For instance, like I made this little stop motion cat out of pipe cleaners, and there's a point where he like squishes into himself and then flies off the screen, and I had no idea what that sounded like. So I ended up just finding like this slide whistle, but it took me hours of looking through different sounds, listening, syncing up. Do you have any tips for, and part of the problem is, like, there's some free websites I use, like freesound.org and whatever, but I find I don't even know what to search for in like text Like
Sure.
sometimes I'm just like funny, whimsical, and other times I'm like, I don't know, bubble popping, or like I was searching for a sound that sounded like grinding, and the grinding noises on there were just ridiculous and didn't match at all. Do you have tips for searching for specific sounds or even exploring, I guess?
One tip, I'm going to answer your question, but I feel like a lot of people use this free audio website, which I even used at the beginning as well. One tip when you're using this website to get better quality sounds is if you look to the right, there's some numbers that'll say, 16-bit, 24-bit, and then there's another one called sample rate. And the sample rate will give you a couple options. And if you click the one that's like 48, generally people with better equipment that know what they're doing are going to record things at a little bit of a higher quality. So because the problem I would have is like, I would go on that website and type in something and it's like, it just sounds like crap. It's like an MP3 not recorded well. So to me, that's a good, easy way of just adjusting some of your search parameters to be a little bit higher quality, and you'll find that the actual results might be a little more favorable. But when it comes to, so your question was like, if like you were building a cat and you were struggling with what sounds to kind of search for, or no, what text to input, right?
What text? Yeah, what do I even like? First of all, I don't really have an idea in my mind,
Of
but
what you
I don't even know what to search for.
Sure. Yes, and that's another one I don't think it's an easy answer. That's something you'll just develop over time. Because what'll happen is you do it enough and you start kind of almost remembering, right? Like, oh, I searched this and this came up here and there and there. I'm sure might be some better optimized systems for doing that. Yeah, that one is definitely tricky. And sometimes it does just take a lot of time, right? That's part of the job. It's like, you were mentioning like earlier, I don't have the patience to do animation, but for whatever reason, I do have patience to sit there and search sounds. Maybe because it captivates my attention a little earlier. But if there's some advice that I can give for that, I will say that there are certain keywords that, that we use in these sound libraries that aren't that may not be so intuitive, so to speak. For instance, actually, I just saw an article about this. I didn't read it, but I was like, oh, that's funny. They're like writing about this. I don't know. Are you familiar with the phrase walla? WALLA. So
no.
if you were to type in on the free sound effects walla, what you're gonna get is a crowd of people not saying words, but just kind of chattering in the background, like blah, 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 and you're going to get a nice little ambience background of a whole crowd of people. That is called a walla. So if you're ever looking for just like a general background layer of just the sound of people in a room, you would type walla, And so there are certain sort of key phrases and searches that will help you sort of get to where you want to go. And I would definitely, a quick Google search, you should be able to find a little PDF with just like common sound effects search terms, or and that might be a good tool if you're just starting out and kind of learning these things.
What about music? Because that's another thing I really struggle with, finding the right music for something. I have no idea what to search either.
That's something I don't have as much experience with.
Because you make your own.
But I think I will be able to help a little bit in that, in a sense that I do know that there are certain libraries, I doubt they're free libraries, but there are certain libraries that do they understand that people searching for music aren't going to know technical terms. So music, it would be a better place to just type in emotions and feelings, right? So like certain, you can say like dark and gritty, slightly hopeful, and there are certain websites where it'll list out moods, so to speak.
Gotcha. Can you think of any websites that are specifically good to use? I mean, we mentioned freesound.org, but Are there other ones out there that are really good to use?
To be quite frank, that's the only one I've ever used.
Okay, right.
From back in the day. I mean, it depends on like if you want to put a little money into it, which I would encourage you to do because the quality of the sound effects are going to be a lot better. You know, there's like I think there's one called like Sound Dogs, and again, Facebook groups. There's a whole Facebook group I'm a part of for people that record and promote their own sound effects libraries that they sell, which is kind of great. There's this whole like movement of indie recording sounds, and it's like weird stuff. You know, it's amazing. Like it'll be like this guy. He has this weird old antique machine in his barn. And so he'll take a microphone out there and record all the weird little gears and just metal bending and the whole thing and organize it, record it, process it well, and then sell it as a package called like, you know, antique metal machine in the barn. Great. I'm always looking for those kind of weird, bizarre, fringy kind of stuff, especially for sound design, you know, like, you know, taking a saw to a piece of metal, you know, will get you in some interesting places.
Gotcha. Cool. So I'm interested in like what you're doing now. I know that I already had an interview with David for Open the Portal.
Yeah.
We talked about kind of the pitching process, but is there anything cool that you're working on there that you want to talk about now?
Yeah, so we're in the process of kind of developing and pitching a television series, and so we started production in January and we finished it up last month. And it was an amazing project to get just some of the most talented people we know all in the room animating downstairs. And I was able to create all the music and sound for it. And it was probably actually one of the more challenging projects I've ever had to work on. But I'm extremely excited about it. It's we did a sort of Alice in Wonderland, or I'm sorry, a Wizard of Oz sort of feeling to the piece, where it starts and you feel a little bit like you're actually in an old Fleischer cartoon, but it's all in stop motion. And then a moment happens where the character sort of transcends through, you know, some sort of portal, and now all of a sudden we're in color full dimension land. So coming from a sound point of view, you know, I had to really I can't use modern sound effects in that black and white part because they don't match. It's you see the visual and you hear a modern sound effect and they're not even in the same ballpark, you know. So I had to record my own, use certain aging process filters and get real creative with some plugins to kind of age the sound in a way where it's not too old, but you know, it's still clear enough and creates the vibe and feeling of an old cartoon. And one of the cool techniques I wanted to do was to really, I wanted that moment when we go into color for it to be the most impactful possible. One of the techniques I employed was I actually mixed and recorded the entire first half in mono. So for people that don't know audio, you have two speakers, you have left and right, and you normally have sounds coming from both. Whenever you record in mono, it means all the sound is coming directly from the middle, so it actually sounds very small. And all the old cartoons, they didn't have two speakers, they only had one speaker. So everything was in mono, and then the second we break into color, we call it a stereo spectrum, right? So the right, left, all of a sudden it gets wide, and you can hear stuff. And then you hear low end and all these like new sounds, and it like really supported the feeling of kind of the contrast.
I think that's an excellent example. I've seen the pitch, and it's absolutely phenomenal. I watched it like 10 times in a row, but yeah, the sound design, I mean, from like I being like into stop motion, I absolutely loved the stop motion and how that was made to look like Fleischer cartoons.
Right.
But the sound design, yeah, it's seamless, and like it's something I didn't even think about, which is, I guess, exactly what you want.
Exactly. If you're noticing it, I'm not doing my job correctly.
Yeah, but the first half in black and white, and you're right. Like I can think of the exact moment when he goes to the portal and it turns colorful, and the sound totally changes. Like I can even think of what it is in my mind because it was such like a bam in your face. And that's like what you're saying before with the story. Like you want the sound to enhance the story you're telling, and I think that's exactly what happened.
Absolutely. And even going back to talking about process of like, Dave and I developed this together. And I remember talking about this moment way before we even started shooting of like, that moment when we go to color. And I had that idea like way before I even started doing it, because it was already in my brain and I had time to kind of think about, all right, how can I support that? And I knew that was one of the techniques I wanted to implement.
I think for me, that's the kind of the biggest takeaway of talking with you. It's kind of changed my perception of sound design, because before, sound was like, okay, I need to add these effects to match whatever I've created in animation. But like what I've learned from you is it actually should enhance or tell a story, not on its own, but like as one, not like, okay, this character is walking, so it just needs a footstep
Right.
in every scene it's walking,
Right.
versus like, how can I tell a story through the sound? I think that's amazing.
And I would say to like to even hit that point home more is like, as long as it's supporting the story and the imagery, there's really not a wrong way to do it. Like you could have some sound that sounds all distorted and twisted and mangled and wrong, but if it's the right image behind it and it's supporting the story, maybe that's the best thing you could possibly do.
Yeah. So how did you learn that over time? Like when you were starting out, was it always, this was always the goal and that's why you love it? Or is there a specific moment that you realized this is how it needs to be?
That's a really good question. I think, to be honest, I've always just kind of viewed art, like I said, in kind of this weird kind of philosophical way. And it came from me being scared and wanting to like figure out what it is that I do. Like I remember the day that I sat down, so I'll say it really started when back in my music production days, right? Because what is a song, right? A song is telling a story. So I had to learn as a music producer, every decision I made with that band should always be supporting the story in whatever, whether it's the album or the song, and that kind of, again, where it stemmed from me one day deciding I want to be a record producer and then really thinking about it and going, what the hell does a record producer do? Like, what is my job, right? And like really thinking about that. And then it just kind of led me down this weird kind of existential path of like really thinking about, well, what is art, like what is society, and like kind of implementing that into my thinking. Anyway, that's my long-winded answer.
That's fine. No, I love it. I'm also curious, have you ever made like a giant mistake on something that you've worked on that you like cringe looking back, like a project?
Let me see. Yes, I mean, yes, I've made probably every mistake that there is. That is how you become an expert, is you have to make every mistake possible.
Yeah.
I still have plenty of mistakes to make. I can even tell you confidently today, I sent out an audio. They wanted me just for sound design, and I did all the sound design, and they gave me a temp track of the voiceover, and for whatever reason, I just spaced out, and I sent them the audio track with the temp dialogue in it, which they only needed the sound design, and so I had to get an email that was like, "Hey, can you send us this without the voiceover?" And I was like, "God, it's a professional. I shouldn't be doing this, So it's like, mistakes happen every day, and it's not a big deal. You just resend it, and But biggest mistake, oh gosh, man, I don't know. The one I cringe about the most came from my music production days of, I was recording this, long story short, I recorded this album and the singer kind of got sick near the end and couldn't really do his vocals well, and they kind of had a rough time, and we had to just finish the album, and then they came back to me to produce the next album. And I part of being a producer is you're a little bit of a psychologist, right? And you have to kind of like maneuver and make decisions to get the best product. And I knew that singer had really bad experience in my vocal booth just from when he was sick and having a bad time. So I told him, I said, hey, I have a friend of mine that has this old vintage mic at another studio that I think would be great for your voice. I think we should do the vocals over there. So we went over there, did the vocals, and dude, I mean, good Lord. He was a one-take wonder that day, which is like unheard of, like in music where you can do a million takes. It was like the first take, he just nailed it every freaking time. And I was just like, yes. And long story short, I got all the files on the hard drive, and the band was like, hey, we're going to come back in a month and we'll do the mix. And so I kept them stupidly on that hard drive without ever pulling them off the hard drive, right? And sure enough, they hit me up. They're like, we're ready to do this. And I load the files in, and it was just a corruption error fluke, right? And I even called out my buddy at my other studio, and I was like, hey, man, do you still have those files? And he was like, man, if you had literally called me yesterday, I was like 1 day late. He just deleted them.
Oh my goodness.
And
that is the worst.
Band, like, dude, those perfect vocals you did are just gone forever. That was probably one of the most like frustrating, cringy things that has ever happened.
Oh my goodness! Wow.
Needless to say, they did not come back to me.
Yeah. Cool. Well, I'm just like, well, from my end, I think I've pretty much asked everything I've been interested in. I think it's like great that you have music production, but also like very specific animation, sound production, and music production, which I've never really even thought of as a thing before our chat. So I'm really happy we've chatted. Is there anything that you want to share or that you want to talk about or whatnot?
I feel like we've had a pretty extensive conversation, actually. I feel like you're a pretty good host.
Hey, what up? Is there anything that you would go back and tell your younger self, thinking about like getting into the career path you've chosen?
I'd probably just say, it's going to be a long, hard road, but just keep going.
So well, that was going to be my second question. Like, for me, like choosing to go into animation specifically now at this time in my life was such a hard decision to make because I had built up so much in a different career because I was way too scared to ever get into animation. So what was that thing keeping you going, even though it was so tough?
I heard someone say one time that it's, wait, who said that? Oh, I actually, no, I said this, sorry.
Quote yourself.
I thought it was a quote, as I like to quote and use metaphors, because I usually lack original thought, but it was like, I feel like two people, they can view art in two ways, where it's like, people either treat art like a little bit almost like a drug, where they're like, I'm happy and I want to feel like, or I'm sad and I want to feel happy, so I'm going to like ingest this sort of art or create this art to like alter my mood and kind of like experience in a certain way. And then there's like some people that like experience art like almost more like a disease, where you don't really have a choice, like you're just infected with this disease and you can't get rid of it. And unfortunately, I feel like I've been afflicted most of my life, where I don't really ever feel like I had a choice.
So what keeps you going forward is this disease called art. I can relate. I mean, that's what I was animating on the side, waking up at 6 a.m. before work, coming home from work, doing stuff till midnight until I realized that I just have to do this.
It's crazy, right? Like, anyone who does this stuff, you got to be like, we're not normal people.
No, I talk to my friends and they're like, yeah, come home and watch Netflix. And I'm like, don't you want to create shit? And they're like, nah, I'm happy. All right, well, thank you so much. I've had a really good chat. It's been really interesting, and I feel enlightened into this world of sound design and composition and stuff. Even though I really have no really experience at all other than searching on freesound.org and applying some footstep sound effects.
Yeah, and I'm looking forward to hearing the end result.
Yeah, I'll have to send you some of my stuff. So yeah, thank you so much for coming on the podcast. It's really been a good chat.
Absolutely.
Great. And if you're listening and you want to get in touch with Barret, you can find him on his website, which is barretslagl.com, which I'll include in the link of our description. I'll include the link to that in the description of this podcast. So thank you so much for listening. And that's all for now. Okay, bye.